of a techno. I'm sorry, becoming a techno wizard in this series, and we're going to continue our series on anarchy, reading about anarchy, and Peter Gellerlou's Anarchy Works. So the last week we finished chapter 3 talking about the economy and the different considerations therein. This one we're going into the environment, starting with the section of what's to stop someone from destroying the environment. So this book has been really fantastic. It's been a lot of really great insights and resources and just awesomeness. um, just good considerations to think about in terms of society, whether you believe in anarchy or not. You know, I think it's been a very enlightening. So, without further ado, well, let's begin, shall we? um, Starts off with no philosophy or movement for liberation can ignore the connection between human exploitation of the environment and our exploitation of one another. Ooh, already starting off strong. Nor can it ignore the suicidal ramifications of industrial society. Oh my goodness. A free society must forge a respectful and sustainable relationship with its bioregion on the understanding that humans depend on the health of the entire planet. This this is why I love this book so much. Like it's so insightful, so straightforward, but these are things that people just refuse to really recognize very often, right? Um, the idea that first of all, you can't ignore the connection between human exploitation of the environment and our exploitation of one another, right? Like in the fact that because we live here in the environment, whenever you exploit the environment to get the resources that you need, it requires you to exploit other people, other humans, right, to get those resources out of the environment. Thus slavery, thus the blood diamonds, thus uh, wage slavery, if you want to call that, thus all these, bad working conditions and this, that, and the other, um, where you require people to, you know, do a whole bunch of onerous work, usually for little or no pay, in order to get what you want out of the land, right? Um, the environment is going to produce its resources. And if you want to get more of those resources, then the environment is willing to produce like kind of willingly, kind of like on its own naturally, then it's going to be a lot of work, right? And usually that work is not being done by those people who want that profit. And that's a super important aspect right there. And then this part right here can ignore the suicidal ramifications of industrial society. That's huge, right? It's the fact that the exploitation of the environment causes, right, it's a direct correlation and causation to the harms from the environment, to things like, of course, climate change, but extreme temperatures and weather and things like that, famine, desertification, extinction of animals, and uh, poisoning of the water, the soil, and all that stuff, which feeds, of course, back into us because we are just another part of the land. We're another part of the environment. And so any kind of exploitation of the environment and poisoning of the environment, pollution of the environment, pollutes ourselves, pollutes our bodies, our minds, our spirits, whatever you want to call it, in a every way, like metaphorical, figurative, and literal, spiritual, right? It destroys us, and we can get along, somewhat fine, but it's a slow and painful suicide, right? And we see this in our society today. Uh, Unfortunately, right, many people can hide from this, right? Because there are so many ways in which this is affecting us, and many of those ways are sort of invisible, right? Or at least not easily visible. The fact that we have microplastics in our DNA now, right? Many of us don't even realize this, but scientists are able to look inside of our, our genes, or at least our cells, and see microplastics messing around there. Like, oh, what's it doing there, right? Or the fact that, like for instance, the nuclear testing, right? They can tell when you were born based on your thyroid, because um, the nuclear fallout that happened in the nuclear testing here in America. I'm not even talking other places. I'm talking about here in America, right? There was a nuclear meltdown or something like that from testing, and the waste went into the water, right? So everybody born like east of the Mississippi, right? That nuclear waste from the water was in the genetics of the children, and so that their thyroids, was able to or absorb some of that. Now we're not sure if it had negative consequences. We think it probably doesn't, but we also see a kind of uptick of things like autoimmune diseases and cancer and all this other stuff. Probably does have things that was negative consequences, but we can't, right? We can't see all the connections, or maybe it's being hidden. Either way, the point is that you know a lot of the stuff that we're doing to our environment in order to industrialize is poisoning us, right? And we this is facts. You can see this, so it's just good to recognize that because a lot of times we want to ignore those facts. We want to just it's not that important. Yeah, it's pretty important. So yeah, I just love how this starts off. What's to stop someone from destroying the environment? Some people oppose capitalism on environmental grounds, but think some sort of state is necessary to prevent ecocide. I know they're gonna break this down, so let me let him talk. But the state is itself a tool for the exploitation of nature. Exactly. So socialist states such as the Soviet Union and People's Republic of China have been among the most ecocidal regimes imaginable. Yep. Um, and they're not even like actual socialists, right? Like they don't really care for the people. It's just certain people in power who let me not get into that. That these two societies never escape the dynamics of capitalism is itself a feature of the state structure. Exactly. It necessitates hierarchical, exploitative, economic relationships of control and command. And once you start playing that game, nothing beats capitalism. Right? You can't beat capitalism at its own game. That was my own problem, right? Early on in my own journey of wanting to change the world, I thought, oh, you know what? Capitalism is everywhere. It's crazy. We've got all this stuff from it. But what if I can beat the game of capitalism with capitalism? Right? What if I can become super rich, become a trillionaire? Right? This is the origins of my own channel. I said, what if I become a trillionaire by creating amazing inventions and innovations that help everybody? Right? Then I can, get all this money and I can solve the world's problems that way, right? I thought I was super detailed. Like I used to answer questions about what would you do with $1 trillion? Well, I would create this city, do this, do all this. Not just that city, but like a whole bunch of cities, like super cities based on this type of technology, and create blah 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 blah. Right? I was super detailed with it, but then I realized by just playing the game of capitalism, right, you lose. Right, you destroy the environment, you destroy people, you destroy yourself, and half the time you don't even notice it. Right, that's the insidious nature of capitalism. It seems like it's working because we can have all this progress, but then you look around and you notice all these people suffering, mentally, spiritually, physically, in ways that you don't that's not obvious, right? So it becomes a very, like I said before, a slow and painful death. And that's the unfortunate truth of capitalism, right? You can believe in it all you want, but it's not gonna it's not gonna remove the negative consequences that comes along with this. Yeah. However, the state does present the possibility of forcibly changing people's behavior on a massive scale, and this power is attractive to some environmentalists. There have been a few states in world history that enforced protective measures domestically when saving the environment coincided with their strategic interests. One of the foremost is Japan, which halted and reversed deforestation in the archipelago around the Meiji period. But in this case, in other cases, domestic environmental protections enforced by the state were coupled with greater exploitation abroad. Japanese society consumed increasing amounts of imported wood, fueling deforestation in other countries and providing an incentive for the development of an imperial military to secure these vital resources. This led, this led not only to environmental devastation, but also to warfare and genocide. Similarly, in Western Europe, statist environmental protections came at the expense of colonial exploitation, which also resulted in genocide. Right, and that's again a super great point here, is that, and this is video by a YouTuber by the name of whose channel is by the name of um, let me see, Climatetown. Climatetown. I just found that YouTube channel, and he did a really great video talking about how carbon offsets really is not doing anything, right? It's just like the companies already spending all that carbon, right, are releasing all that carbon in the atmosphere, and then all they're doing is paying off a smaller company to not spend that amount of carbon. It's not like they're actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere. They're just trying to pay it off, what they're doing by just paying off another company to not produce carbon, or to make renewable energy and things like that. But it doesn't matter how much renewable energy you put in if you're still putting in so much carbon. So likewise for environmental protection agencies or things like that. Doesn't matter how much of your local environment you're saving if you go out and just destroy somebody else's environment in order to get what you want. You have to reduce the overall consumption, right? The overall exploitation, the overall destruction around the entire world. We all live on the same planet, and it's all interconnected, right? Just because you don't live in Brazil doesn't mean that the deforestation, the complete destruction of the Amazon rainforest doesn't affect you. It does. It affects you, affects me, affects everyone on this earth, because that's the one of the most important ways in which carbon gets sequestered in the first place. And by burning down that forest, not only do you reduce how much carbon can get out of the atmosphere, but you also put more carbon into the atmosphere from the burning down of all those trees, right? And not to mention all the amazing, life forms that are being lost from there, a lot of which might hold resources that we can later use to solve things like cancer, or any of these other, diseases and things like that. It's just so you have to pay attention to the global environment, man. Let's continue. In smaller scale societies, the existence of an elite tends to fuel environmental exploitation. Exactly. The renowned social collapse on Easter Island was caused in large part by the elite, who compelled the society to build statues in their honor. Right? 100%. This statue building complex deforested the island, as large numbers of logs were needed for scaffolding and transportation of the statues, and farmland to feed the laborers came at the expense of more forests. Yeah, exactly. And it's so silly, because when you hear about the Easter Island thing, if you just look at it on the surface level, they say, "Oh, it was overpopulation, right? It was too many people on this little island. They was eating everything up." I'm like, no, they were living on this island for a long, long time. Why was it only at this point where everything just went downhill, right? It was because of this, the hierarchy they developed in those latter years, and they started playing, oh, build statues and do this and do that, right? And which encourages people to destroy the environment and make it so that the population cannot keep up with the resources, right? Well, that's what people don't get about scarcity, is that for a large part in the environment, scarcity is almost always a result of overconsumption. It's not a result of no overpopulation, because in almost any animal that has any modicum of awareness of their environment, right? Whenever they become overpopulated, right? Well, first of all, they stop reproducing before they get to a point where they're overpopulated, right? It's a natural um, um, results, as a natural response to realizing that, oh, if I have all these kids, they're not going to be able to eat. So you necessarily have less kids in the first place. So first of all, overpopulation is not natural in most species that have any sort of self-awareness in their environment. And second of all, even when they do, for those that do keep continue to populate, they move around, right? They move out, they migrate, and that migration in turn helps feed the environment, because those seeds that they eat up, whatever, and gets pooped out in some other place, and that helps the plants to migrate as well. So it's a natural cycle of reproduction, population growth, expansion. Um, um, I want to say colonization, but like the original term of colonization, which is repopulation of, or population of, um, plants and animals in different places, things like that. Right? It's a cycle. But what we do, it's more like locusts or something like that. We go and just eat everything up, and everything starts dying off. But unlike locusts who can, who take a while to do that whole cycle again of eating everything up and then reproducing somewhere else. um, we are aware enough to keep producing, to keep exploiting, to keep consuming, but not aware enough to realize that we're running out of resources. Or we are aware that we're running out of resources, but we think it's natural. We think it's like, oh yeah, it's limited resources, so therefore we need to do all this stupid stuff. Like, no, what makes it natural is if you just let it reproduce, let nature rejuvenate, let it regenerate, um, and then by doing so, it becomes readily abundant. But anyways, without forests, soil fertility plummeted, and without food, the human population plunged as well. But they didn't just starve or decrease their birth weight. The clan elites warred with one another, knocking down rival statues and carrying out raids that culminated in cannibalism until nearly the entire society died off. Mm, right. So not only do we die off like in a naturally when we humans end up in this sort of system of warring between hierarchies between powers, but we resort to like the worst type of stuff like cannibalism, pillaging, and all this other stuff, and it gets terrible. A decentralized communal society with a commonly held ecological ethos is the best equipped to prevent environmental destruction. In economies that value local self sufficiency over trade and production, communities have to deal with the environmental consequences of their own economic behaviors. They cannot pay others to take their garbage or starve so they can have an abundance. Local control of resources also discourages overpopulation. Studies have shown that when the members of a society can directly see how having too many children would diminish the resources available to everyone, right? They keep their families within a sustainable limit, right? I just said this, but this is the point. Like people think that, oh, we're stupid, animals that are less intelligent than us can do this. So we do this too. We can do this too. The only reason why we don't is because we make it very, very, very difficult to see our own environment, to realize what the hell is going on in our own environment, right? This is why having a delayed response or delayed return community is kind of worse than having an immediate return community. When you store things up for the future, you begin to abstract things away into thinking like, yes, it may be a good skill to be able to be abstract and be able to store things for the future, but it also comes with a side effect of not being able to see what's going on in your immediate environment, and sometimes, especially if it's too abstract, if there's too many layers of abstraction, if you're thinking too far ahead in the future for future gains, right, for future abstract gains, then uh you you can lose out on what's going on now, right? You don't become present, right? We see that all the time here. We see it all the time. And so when something goes wrong, you don't realize why or how, and you don't even realize when something is running out, when your resources are running out, because you're abstracting things too far into the future. But let's see. But when these localized societies are incorporated into a globalized economy in which most resources and waste are imported and exported, and scarcity results from seemingly arbitrary price fluctuations rather than rather than the depletion of local resources, populations climb unsustainably, even if more effective forms of contraception are also available. And Seeing Like a State, James Scott explains how governments enforce legibility, a uniformity that enables comprehension from above in order to control and track subjects. As a result, such societies lose the local knowledge necessary to understand problems and situations. Mm, mm. And that's the problem with globalization, right? Diversity and exchange of goods and knowledge and services and stuff like that is great. It's absolutely fantastic. But when you globalize a culture, right? When you globalize a local culture, you lose the local culture and you lose the local awareness, right? It's important to have localization of resources because that allows you to be aware of those resources. If you're just importing everything that you have in your local environment, then you're not aware of your local environment. And if you're furthermore not just exporting but importing a whole bunch of other things from other people's environments, then once again you're not being aware. So it's a twofold problem of importing, exporting in a globalized economy, right? On two fronts, you're abstracting yourself away from the local environment, right? You're losing the awareness. And so we have what we have today. I can look outside and I can even tell you what's local to my environment. I'm not sure if these trees are local, right? Somebody could have planted these trees from Asia or something like that. Like I know we have some blossom trees somewhere around here. Don't get me wrong, I love them. They're beautiful, but they're not natural to this environment. And so if something goes wrong, right, if it impacts the environment some way, I'm not even sure what's going on, right? This is why kudzu is so bad where I live here in Georgia. You have kudzu vines everywhere, and it just chokes the life out of their environment because it's not native. And there's so many instances of this. So yeah, it's a serious problem. Capitalism, Christianity, and Western science all share a certain mythology regarding nature, which encourages exploitation and contempt. Oof, yes, let's Christianity, yeah, let's and views the natural world as dead, mechanical, and existing to satisfy human consumption. Right? The idea that we are just the stewards of nature, that we're the masters of nature, that God put us on this earth to take charge of everything. Right? That is an extremely arrogant idea, right? Even if you deem yourself a humble steward, a humble shepherd, right? That's still arrogant because it makes you think that you're so far above these other animals and plants when in reality we are just one animal. We are one animal. The fact that we even have a word for animals and nature when we are part of it is a problem, right? So yeah, there's a lot of great things you can get into this. This megalomania there, I love that. Masquerading as reason or divine truth has revealed itself beyond all doubt to be suicidal. What is needed instead is a culture that respects the natural world as a living, interconnected thing and understands our place within it. Bruce Stewart, a Maori writer and activist, told an interviewer, pointing to a flowering vine he had planted by his house. He said, "This vine no longer has a name. Our Maori name has been lost, so we'll have to find another. Only one of this plant remained in the world, living on a goat-infested island. The plant could go any day, so I got a seed and planted it here. The vine has grown, and although it normally takes 20 years to bloom, this one is blooming after 7. Hmm. If we are to survive, each of us must become kaitaike, kaitaike, I don't know, kaitiake, which to me is the most important concept in my own Maori culture. We must become caretakers, guardians, trustees, nurturers. In the old days, each wanao or family used to look after a specific piece of terrain. One family might look after a river from a certain rock down to the next bend, and they were the kataki of the birds and fish and plants. They knew when it was time to take them to take them to eat, and when it was not. When the birds needed to be protected, the people put a rahu or hai on them, which means the birds were temporarily sacred, and some birds were permanently tapu, which means they were full-time protected. This protection was so strong that people would die if they broke it. It's that simple. It needed no policing. In their eagerness to unsavage my ancestors, Christian missionaries killed the concept of tapu along with many others. Goodness, that's a that's a really, again, important thing, right? Like they talked. There's a quite a few, I think, stories about like how Native Americans here in America, of course, but like they're like almost a part of the land as much as any other thing. Like they are a part of the land as much as the bisons and the trees, right? They actually showed that the bisons that were going extinct, um, they needed the natives to move back into that land to take that land back from the Americans in order to kind of because they were aware of the cycle. They knew how to help the bisons to find the things around there or to migrate around the area or to which bisons to kill, which ones to keep alive, and things like that in order for that bison population to to populate, to grow. And so, it just shows you that humans are a part, can and should be a part of the natural the natural animal kingdom, right? The cycle of nature, the cycle of life, just like every other animal and plant. The fact that we've taken ourselves out of it in Western society and in Christianity and in capitalism is a huge problem, and it's a source of many of our destructive tendencies. Destructive tendencies are not natural; they're a result of our loss of place, our loss of belonging and presence, and our loss of understanding and awareness of the environment. So, goodness, this is great. I love this chapter. This is a long one though. Oh goodness, this is a long one. Yeah, I don't know if I should end it there. I keep going. Tikopia, a Pacific island settled by Polynesian people, provides a good example of a decentralized anarchic society that has successfully dealt with life and death environmental problems. The island is only 1.8 square miles in area and supports 1,200 inhabitants. That is 800 people per square mile of farmland. The community has existed sustainably for 3,000 years. 3,000 years, bro. What kingdoms do you know today that existed for 3,000 years? Not a one. All right. Tikopia is covered in multi-storied orchid gardens that mimic the natural rainforest. At first sight, most of the island appears to be covered in forest, though true rainforests only remain on a few steep parts of the island. Tikopia is small enough that all its inhabitants can become familiar with their entire ecosystem. It is also isolated, so for a long time they could not import resources or export the consequences of their lifestyle. Each of the four clans have chiefs, though these have no coercive powers and play a ceremonial role as the custodians of tradition. Tacopia is among the least socially stratified of the Polynesian islands. For example, the chiefs still have to work and produce their own food. Population control is a common value, and parents feel it is immoral to have more than a certain number of children. And one striking example of the power of these collectively held and reinforced values, around the year 1600, the islanders reached a collective decision to end pig breeding. They slaughtered all the pigs on the island, even though pig meat was a highly valued food source, because keeping pigs was a major strain of the environment. In a more stratified hierarchical society, this might not have been possible, or this might have been impossible, because the elite world typically forced poorer people to suffer the consequences of their lifestyles rather than give up an esteemed luxury product. Exactly. Right. This is this is close my window. This is a problem we have today, right? They say, "Oh, we need to give up meat. We need to, try to eat less beef and things like that." Um, but of course, you got Chick-fil-A and all these other companies. That Chick-fil-A, they don't want to start saying eat chicken. Um, but yeah, you got these people are like, oh no, we can eat beef, right? We just you're gonna take away my beef, even though the fact that it's literally like unsustainable, right? And I love beef too, right? Don't get me wrong, I love me some good burgers and all this other stuff, but like, look at the environment. Like, if we can't grow beef in your backyard, right? Um, in order for us to have the beef that we want, we have to import it, and we import it from these places in which we just like in South America, they destroy a huge amount of the rainforest, slash and burn, turn a lot of it into a cornfield or some other field for a whole to feed a whole bunch of cows, right? And that's how we get our milk and our beef and things like that. And it's deeply unsustainable, right? But of course, we don't have to think about it, so we say, "Ah, it doesn't matter. It's not that important, right?" We can't even make these decisions like it. Even if I gave up meat, it wouldn't matter because it's industrialized. It doesn't matter what me or you or Joe Blow down the street thinks about meat. It's the fact that it's an industry. It's an industry, and we can say, oh, it depends on what you buy. If a whole bunch of people just stop buying meat, then the industry would collapse. Like, no, that's not how industry works. They have investments, right? And the fact that it's like what I was saying earlier, their returns are so far ahead in the future. It's 10, 20, 30, 50 years, right? They're expecting returns for the next decade at least. So even if everybody stops today, right, it would take decades for the industry to catch up and to realize that, oh, we're not getting the profit. Yeah, it might, some businesses, right, some smaller businesses, some businesses might shut down, but the industry at large, it will take a long time, maybe not decades, but at least a decade, right? It would take a long time for that sort of thing to kind of percolate through the system. And that's the problem with having too many levels of abstraction and importation and exports and all this other stuff. It's very problematic. Before colonization and the disastrous arrival of missionaries, population control methods on Tacopia included natural contraception, abortion, and abstinence for younger people. Yeah, that's another thing that people, don't realize. A lot of these cultures, pre, modern day contraceptives and things like that, had abortion, right? It was called. Some people might call it infanticide, because they were killing the infants, but that was like a method of abortion. And you can say what you want about it, but the fact is that if you don't have the resources, right, to raise children in a healthy manner, right, to make sure that those children are loved, are fed, are part of the culture, the environment, then why are you going to raise them just because you feel like, oh, God says I should have children, right? The fact that you do not have abortion, if you just have children, despite whether or not you can actually raise them healthily, means that you're raising children, right? Another generation who categorically will not have the same level of resources as you do, will not have the same level of love and support and access to food and all this other stuff, right? And because of that, they will most likely be abused in some way. They will likely be neglected in some way. They will likely, experience scarcity and all these other problems. And that, of course, comes with its own trauma, its own set of problems, its own set of um, issues that results in things like violence, and it begets more abuse and their children, and creates a cycle of problematic behaviors, right? A lot of the negative behaviors that we experience in our societies are born from the fact that people don't get abortions by gender. Like we see on the whole in Western society, abortion is kind of seen as a bad thing, even though we claim that we have more than enough of resources for everybody, but we know we have people in poverty, right? And even if you're not in poverty, even if you're the wealthiest family ever, right, the fact that you only have so much attention, so if you have 3 kids born year after year, you literally cannot give them enough attention. You cannot give them all the attention they need, because it takes, the full attention of not just two parents, but an entire community of people per child, for them to get the belonging they need, the education they need, the wisdoms, the spirituality, the connections, all that stuff. Humans need a lot of effort, right, to raise holistically, and we think we could just basically pop them in the microwave. Basically, with what we're doing, like just, oh yeah, just have one kid every year or every 2 years, and push them into school, and boom, you're good to go. I'm like, no, this is why we have so many problems. This is why we have narcissism going crazy, sociopathy, psychopathy, all these problems, because we can't even raise our kids, can't raise our kids correctly. Like, it's goodness, man, it's a lot. um, Though this was a compassionate celibacy that amounted to a prohibition on reproduction rather than on sex, Ticopians also used other forms of population control, such as infanticide, right? That many people in other societies would find impermissible. But Ticopia can still provide us with a perfectly valid example. Oh, excuse me. Because with the effectiveness of modern contraception and abortion techniques, no other methods are necessary for a decentralized approach to population control. The most important feature of the Tucopian example is their ethos, their recognition that they lived on an island and resources were limited, so that increasing their population was tantamount to suicide. Other Polynesian island societies ignored that fact and subsequently died off. The planet Earth, in this sense, is also an island. Accordingly, we need to develop both global consciousness and localized economies so we can avoid exceeding the capacity of the land and stay aware of the other living things with whom we share this island. Indeed, overpopulation is almost never a problem in and of itself. It's a symptom of a problem, right? It's a symptom of everything we spoke about earlier, of the fact that you don't give enough resources to the people who've actually alive, who are, for each individual, right? And because of that, and because furthermore, because of the abstraction of consequences, the abstraction of what's available in your environment, right? We think we just pop niggas out, and I I say, excuse my language, but and I really enjoy having a big family. I come from a big family, right? I speak from experience. I have 5 siblings, right? I love all of them, they're amazing, but our childhood was hard, right? It was tough, and there's just not enough to go around, right? And it's not even about scarce reach. I'm just like, even in the space of attention, like, even if you are wealthy, even if we were born wealthy, we weren't. Don't get me wrong, we were far from that. But even if we did, I'm sure you can point out to many people who from wealthy families and didn't have enough attention, right? Even single children born to wealthy families still have attention problems, right? Not because they got too much attention, but because they didn't get enough. Because it doesn't matter how much attention one parent can give you. You need not just two parents, but entire community. Once again, you need your grandparents, insights. You need your aunts and uncles insights. You need your neighbors insights. You need peers insights. You need, all this stuff just to create a mentally healthy human being, a psychologically healthy human being. And we've we just completely destroyed that idea with this idea of a nuclear family, right? I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but it's still related to this idea of being on an island and things like that. Like, it's about community, and yeah, it's a lot I mean, need to think about for this. Today, most of the world is not organized into communities that are structured to be sensitive to the limits of the local environment, but it is possible to recreate such communities. There is a growing movement of ecologically sustainable communities, or eco villages, organized on a horizontal, non hierarchical lines. Awesome. This is what I want to build. So I'm paying attention. I really want to, like, when I have children, I want to raise them in an eco village, in a village where they can trust everybody in the community, where everybody's like helping each other, with resources, with wisdoms and sharing information and all this stuff, right? I want my kids to be in actual community, in a village, right? Let's go back to that time. But of course, you can have the internet and all this other great stuff, but it's in the context of that local community. So yeah, let's see what they have to say. In which groups of people ranging from a dozen to several hundred come together to create anarchic societies with organic, sustainable designs. Yes, beautiful. The construction of these villages maximizes resource efficiency and ecological sustainability, and also cultivates sensitivity to the local environment on the cultural and spiritual level. These eco villages are at the forefront of developing sustainable technologies. Any alternative community can degenerate into yuppie escapism. And eco villages are vulnerable to this. But a leading part of the eco village movement seek to develop and spread innovations that are relevant to the world at large, rather than to close itself off from the world. Yeah, and that's a big part right here, right? This is where the modern day technologies comes in handy. Is that when we build these villages in modern society with modern technology, we can make sure that they stay diverse and they stay open, because we can have the internet. You can say, okay, yes, you were raised in this village, but you know that there's a huge world out there to explore. And so when you get to a certain age, go explore, right? You connect with people on the internet, go find them, right? You're talking about this building these infrastructure projects with all these local communities, go out and do it, right? So the internet and phones and transportation, all that other stuff allows us to build local communities that are still connected, are interconnected with the rest of the world, so that you never have these worries of these rural areas who only ever been in this one spot and never seen anybody else from outside the community, right? You don't have these xenophobic tendencies rise up because your community is too closed off. Thanks to modern technology, we can make sure that even if you're in a not a closed, but in a small community, in a small little village with just 100 people, right? You know how big the world is. You know how diverse the world is, and you can go out and explore. You can go out and connect, and that's where we can have that balance of ancient, small communities and modern day and futuristic, diverse technologies and things like that. So yeah, to help proliferate eco-villages and adapt them to all regions of the globe, and to facilitate coordination between existing eco-villages. 400 delegates from 40 countries met in Findhorn, Scotland in 1995 and established a global eco-village network. I'm almost, I'm almost out of water. My mouth is so dry, so I might have to stop this before I even get to the end. Let me look this up because I really want to, do something like this. See what I can start over here in Atlanta. All right, yeah, I'm gonna stop there. We'll continue about eco villages next time. Um, so yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you learned anything from this. If you agree or disagree or whatever, I'm always open to having conversations, discussions, debates, even if it's real debates, not some bullcrap. So you're not even having that real knowledge. Like let me know what you think. If you're actually practicing some critical thought, and let's have a conversation. Let's learn together. Let's build something better. Build a better future. Right. Don't be afraid to be radical. I think that's gonna be my new catchphrase. Oh, so no, actually, don't be afraid to be revolutionary. Right. Yeah. So yeah. Thanks for listening again. Have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.